Hey folks, my name's Kevin and it's time for a little bit more knife nerdery. Today we're going to be doing a double unboxing of two knives I already own, the TRM Newtron and the TRM Nerd. So the real point of this video is going to be talking about how I got these knives, why I got these knives, and what I'm planning on doing with them. So let's get started. First up, let's check out this box. This one's coming directly from TRM. And this is a naked Newtron. So we'll talk about what that actually means. Okay, so normally if you buy a Newtron, it'll come with a pair of scales on it already and a clip, and it won't have these O-rings. These are something I added on afterward, but it'll be a complete knife ready to use. But if you are familiar with TRMs, you know that these scales are hot swappable. You can take these off and swap on a new pair, a totally different material, totally different color, by just taking off these body screws. And you have to take off the clip screws too. And then what's underneath is the titanium liners that stay as an intact knife. And so that's part of the whole appeal of this, is that you don't have to disassemble the knife or adjust this pivot whatsoever in order to get at what's inside and take these liners off. And so as a result, when you take these off, you kind of end up with a really incredibly thin frame lock almost. Now they're very clear to say not to use it that way because it's not safe. But in theory you could. I would say don't, since they say not to. But because they're hot swappable scales, people like me tend to have, one might say, an excessive number of scales. I think the last time I counted, I have something like 18 or 20 different scales across all of my TRM knives. So as a result, they started selling naked atoms first, and now naked Newtrons. And so instead of coming in a regular box and something like that, this is coming in, oh yeah, right there, do not use without scales. This is coming in one of their sugarcane tube cans that they originally got for the Shadow. And these are really fun because this goes and then slides right out. And you can lock it at any of these spots, and it now stays that length. So these are really cool tubes. But enough people had enough extra scales laying around that they started asking them to sell knives without scales on them so they could get knives to put their extra scales on, which is just the inverse of what the people ever anticipated the problem being. You know, buy more scales to put on your knife instead of buying more knives to put in your scales. But, you know, I personally did not buy this because I have too many scales. I do have too many scales, but that didn't make me want to have more of the exact same knife. I got this for a different reason. There we go. This is what it will look like inside if you take off those scales. This is a naked, scaleless, brand new TRM Newtron. And just for argument's sake, I have a second set of scales here to put on it. So these are the 3D contoured carbon fiber scales that they sell for the Newtron, and they are absolutely stunning. What they do with the light is just freaking wild. I personally am not a carbon fiber person. I've never really liked carbon fiber as a texture. I don't like the way that it feels in my hand normally, but these feel amazing. They have this micro pinstriping. I think you can hear me run my nail across it. And it has just this really delightful kind of texture to it that's very subtle. And honestly, these feel amazing in hand in a way that I don't think any other carbon fiber does. But you saw, all I did right here to put these on was place this down on top. And now I got to put the screws in. So this comes with a set of screws for the clip. Did it also come with a set of screws for the scales? I think it doesn't, and the reason why is when you buy scales, if you've ever bought scales, if you're one of those people that do have a whole bunch of scales, or if you buy a full knife, it comes with the scales you need in the scale set as opposed to with the Newtron. So let's pop these out. By the way, I don't know if you noticed what I just did there. If you have one of these tiny little bags, if you try and shove your fingers in here and rip it apart like that, you're almost always going to split these edges. And so the best way to open these tiny, tiny, tiny micro baggies is to take it in your fingers, pinch it, and twist. And that will open up the thing right there. Okay, let's pop these out. These are going to be a T6. Across the board, all of these are T6s. Everything on TRM is T6 except the pivot, which is a T10. And so there's these really, really short ones. Throw those in. That one went in upside down. Flip it over and do the same thing with the short one right there. Oh, that's interesting. These are long. These are scale clips, screws. Sorry, these are clip screws. Huh. I hadn't thought about that. This isn't a problem for me personally, because I've got a billion of these screw sets. But yeah, that's really interesting. These screw sets that they ship come with 3 short ones, which are the regular screws right there and there, and 2 long ones, which are for the clip. I wonder what they intend you to do. I'm going to message Marianne about that because that seems wrong. So I'm going to have to open up a second one of these in order to get another one of those little scales out. See? Okay. And to mount this, I'll need 2 of these long ones. To put these on, I like to put the screw in first because it's a little bit persnickety. Yep, I'm being clumsy right now. Okay, maybe I'll use the tip of this and maybe it'll stay on. Sometimes it stays on these, sometimes it doesn't. That was way easier. So then what I like to do is once I have these on, I like to lower this down onto where the screws are to get them both lined up and get them kind of sink in at the same time. Now with these contoured scales that they sell, the clip doesn't rest perfectly flat on top of it. You can see that there's a subtle gap right there if I do it loosely. Maybe if I put this underneath, you'll be able to see better. Yeah, right there. So what I do is I tighten the far one first, and then I tighten this one down onto it. And it very slightly bends the back, just ever so slightly, and it becomes flush. And so now, just like that, we have a second Newtron. This one doesn't have thumb O-rings yet. So I'm going to wait until I open up the second one to talk about what I'm actually going to do with these. Ooh, yeah, I do not like using it without the O-rings. I miss my O-rings. Look how easy and soft that is. Is this detent stronger? Ooh, wait a minute. Sounds like there's a tiny little burr Yeah, did you hear that click that it made originally? How I was feeling stuck, and then it kind of snapped out, and now it's coming out easily. It sounds like there was a tiny little burr where the detent ball was engaging, and that's basically gone now. And now I can flick this out just fine. Whew, that is sticky sharp. Wow. They put a very good edge on this. Wow, that is really... You know, I stropped this back, and this is still crazy sharp, but I'd forgotten what these can feel like right out of the box. Okay, let's open up that other one, and then talk about what the whole point of all this is. Oh, wait, no, I skipped an entire part I want to mention. So, these naked neutrons are for people that already have a ton of scales. It's not really meant for if you want one of the scale sets other than what is available during one of the drops. These are still sold during the drop. So they have leaked the naked atoms out and kind of just like random little releases of a few here and there in the past, but most of the time lately they've been putting out naked ones as part of the main drops. And so you can do that. You can say, I don't like any of the scale options that are in the full knife drop, and I would rather get a naked one and tack onto my cart at the same time any of the myriad other scales that they have. You can definitely do that. But the reason why I say it's not really intended for that is because it's going to cost you more. The reality is that when you are buying the complete knife, they're subsidizing the cost of all of the different individual components because you're buying it as a collective set. And so the same way that if you buy a whole complete anything, it's going to cost you less than if you buy all of the pieces individually and try and assemble it yourself, that's the same thing that's going to happen here. And so, for example, if you were to get this exact same configuration by buying this separately and buying the naked one underneath, versus if you were to buy it together, I think it'd end up actually costing you about something like $18 more, I think. And so it's about $18. I think it's like $18. I think it's $18 cheaper to buy one of the complete sets than to buy the comparable components together. And so you can use it to do that whole build your own, but you're definitely going to be paying a slight up fee in that regard. But even then, ooh, yeah, you can see this is much stiffer. This hasn't worn in yet. Anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to mention before I opened up this, and then we can talk about why. So I bought that naked Newtron in a drop. And if you want to buy a Newtron in a drop, the easiest way you can do that is by checking out the frequently asked questions page on the TRM website. They are very mindful about keeping that up to date with the most current information about when the next drop is scheduled. And so if you're ever wondering, how do I get my hands on a TRM knife, go there and you'll see when the next drop is going to be available. They're usually pretty soon. There's usually at least one a month. But the other reality is, if you don't want to wait that long, or if you're comfortable getting one used, but often you don't even have to get one used, if you don't want to wait that long, you can get one from the other members of the TRM Facebook group. There's almost always a knife available for sale, whether it's an Atom, a Nerd, a Neutron, one of the Atlases, one of the OG Neutrons. The only things that aren't available for sale almost ever, but they do come up, are the Shadows. Those just go super duper fast. Anyway, I wanted to get a second Nerd, and there wasn't a Nerd drop scheduled anytime soon because these are a little bit more rare, but one's coming up. I'm not sure when this will post, so one's coming up, I believe, October 13th is, I think. So if this is up before that, and then maybe that'll be helpful information. But I wanted to get one before that, and so I went that other route. And I bought one from another member on the group. And this particular one has Jade G10 scales. You can see this is what I mean when I say they typically come in this type of box as opposed to this type of liner. The shadows come in this, the other ones all tend to come in these. But in addition to the Jade G10 scales, the guy I bought it off of had also purchased a set of natural, no, I think he lists them as natural. These kind of look like maybe they might be OD green. Honestly, can't tell. Those are sometimes really hard to tell. No, this is natural. He bought a set of natural micarta scales too. And this is another perk of buying these knives from a member in the group, is that you can get these little kind of package deals where someone will try and offload, you know, they decide that they don't want the Nerd anymore. For example, it's not the right knife for them. And so they will offload everything they have and you can get a discount. So I got a great deal on these. So thanks to the guy who sold them to me. I'm not going to say his name because don't know if he'd want his name out there. So, right. Let's see. This feels pretty stiff. I'm probably going to have to loosen that up just a touch. And my guess is that as a result, yep. Yeah, I'm having trouble flicking that because this is very tight. That gets us to finally, why did I do this all in the first place? Why did I get 2 of these? And the reality is, I freaking love these knives. I love them. I love them to death. Absolutely love them. They're fantastic knives. But I personally like finger flicking knives more than I like thumb stud opening knives. And with the Newtron, you can thumb stud open it super easily. And especially if you have one of these on the back, I find it's easier, more comfortable that way, you can finger flick it. It does require kind of an odd way of finger flicking because there's very little clearance right here. And most people are used to kind of coming at it from this angle. And the reality is you have to come at it from below. And so imagine the same way with thumb flicking, the way you kind of flick upward, you do that with your finger here. So you kind of tilt the knife slightly more forward and push up. But I still think it'd be more fun to be able to flick like this, like it had a Spidey hole. And the Nerd has something that's kind of approximating that. I've never really understood why they chose to go the route they did. I think the logo here looks fantastic, and I think that the little grip pad here is really nice, but I've always thought that this knife would just work slightly better if this were a hole all the way through. And I'd always kind of crossed my mind that someone could take that out. But then finally, a guy named Tom McDermott, I'm saying his full name because he actually, you know, talks about this stuff in the group and has posted a bunch of pictures of his things. And I think he does mods himself, like offers mods for sale. So I believe you can contact him. But anyway, he posted a picture that I'll pop in of a mod that he did, a slot mod on the TRM Newtron that just immediately captivated me. I knew immediately I wanted that done to a knife. And so I decided, as much as I love this one, I wanted to have a slot version as well. And that immediately made me go, well, if I'm going to be able to get a slot, if I'm going to find someone to do a slot mod version of this Newtron, I might as well get them to do the Nerd too. And the thing is, I'm not 100% sure how I want to do the slot mod on this, because originally I just thought, well, they already have this pad here, and I might as well just punch it out through and make it so that there's this little oval here. But I started looking around at who I would get the mod done through, and I contacted Lindy Lou and Richie B over at knifemodders on Instagram. They are fantastic people, post amazing modding content behind the scenes, and they also are the in-house mod group for Monterey Bay Knives. And so they've been posting some fantastic content on there about like what's going on behind the scenes with Monterey Bay Knives, and that's really cool. And I contacted them to see if they do slot mods. I've never really seen them do a slot mod, because they mostly tend to do kind of finishing work, like various different anno jobs and brush finishes and all sorts of neat kind of carved stuff. But sure enough, they said they could do a slot mod. And when I asked them about doing it on this, they said, oh, well, do you want me to just punch this through, or do you want to have a slot on here as well instead of an oval to make the two match? I went, because of what I'm like as a person, and photoshopped up what those two would look like. So I'm still on the fence, but I'm actually kind of leaning towards doing the slot mod on both rather than leaving this one an oval. I like the idea of leaving this as an oval because it would pay homage to the original design, but I honestly, the more I think about like where my finger would engage here and how I push up, I think a slot mod, which would be slightly more rounded right here rather than coming in so tight, it would just extend a little bit further. I think that would actually be easier and give me more room to push my finger into, and so I think it just would function better. I personally don't have trouble finger flicking this knife most of the time, and right now it seems to be really cooperating, but every now and then I find that this feels just a little bit sticky, like maybe I got a tiny bit of dust in there and there's just a little bit more tension, and then sometimes I find myself flying off, and you can see right now this one I'm having trouble flicking it, period. Yeah, this one's just too tight for flicking, and so I'm gonna send these off to the knife modders. And I don't know, so like I said, they've been posting behind the scenes content. Lindy has a channel which I'll link to. It's fantastic. It's so fun watching how they do this stuff. And I don't want to make any promises because I haven't actually asked her about this yet, but I'm going to see if maybe, just maybe, she'll be willing to film a behind the scenes of how the actual mod happens, because I would freaking love to see that. It'd be so freaking cool. But again, I don't want to... I'll probably ask her about this before I actually post this, just so it's not public, and that way it's not like she feels too much pressure. I don't know, and maybe I'll just cut this part out if she says no. Anyway, yeah, I should end this here. I will update you on what this looks like when I get them back, and then I will have thumb stud, slot, thumb pad? Slot. Hey, so I took the knife apart so I could clean and lube it, see if I could get that action a little bit better. And I figured I ought to show you guys just, what's going on inside and how to put this thing back together. Sorry I missed filming taking it apart, but the reality is taking it apart is pretty darn straightforward. It's getting it back together that people sometimes have trouble with, especially because things like this, these are the little free-floating backspacers. They're just free-floating in there, and it's a little bit hard. Some people have trouble lining them up, so I'll show you what I do there. It's worth noting that the Nerd is the only knife in the standard TRM lineup that has one of these stationary internal stop pins that travels through a smile-shaped arc in the blade. Both the Atom and the Newtron have a more standard stop pin like that the blade collides with. But for the Nerd, they went with this kind of internal stop pin. It also has a D-shaped pivot, but it's only D-shaped on one side. What that means is that it's going to stick through a perfectly circular hole, which it can spin freely in, and you have to line this up on the other side to get it to lock into the D shape that's only on the one side. And I personally like this kind better than the kind that's just a D shape all the way through. My favorite kind of captive pivot is the kind that is captive because of something about this end over here that makes it not be able to spin on that side, but still gives you a full round barrel. This is my second favorite kind because it still gives you that full round barrel. It's just a little bit more tricky to line up this side. So again, I'll show you what my technique is for that. But the reason why I prefer this than the kind that's just a complete D shape all the way down is because the D shape all the way down gives you a gap right here in the blade path. And so when the blade is on it, you can see there would be a kind of a crevice there that gunk could get stuck in. And so by having it like this and have there only be the D shape on the end, there's nowhere for gunk to go. So I like that a little bit better. Okay, let's get going and show you how to do this. These are the phosphor bronze washers. They're very thin, but they don't need to be thick. This is not particularly load bearing in this situation or anything like that. I don't have lube. There we are. I'm going to use some KPL for the phosphor bronze washers, and I'm going to use some heavyweight nano oil for the detent ball. I like to put a tiny little drop on the scale. And that's really just holding the washer in place on that side. The washer might rotate about the scale, but the reality is the majority of the rotation is going to be the blade and the washer. And so the lube over there is mostly just holding the washer in place. I put our little drops down, spread them out slightly, and we can put this in. Let's get some heavy on this detent hole. And put a little bit right there. And then slide this down on. I'm going to put dots right there, spread it around. Now this little dot on this outside is to hold this in place to this when I disassemble it the next time. That may or may not hold, but in my case, I find that it tends to. And so the next step here is to get this lined up with that. And the D shape here has to line with the D shape here. Ultimately, this all needs to line up with the rest of the knife, but the easiest thing for you to do is to get it so that the D shape is in the right spot, and then turn that all to match up with where it needs to be. If you want, you can like try and turn it on this side. It is a little bit harder with these internal stop pin ones because there's only so far that this can go. But if it's really misaligned, you probably just want to turn it as best you can, get it close, and then get this part fixed, and then rotate these pieces themselves to get this to line up to the right spot. Okay, so next we are going to try and put these in. This is something that people have a lot of difficulty with, but what I do, see how it doesn't want to fit in right away? It's just not the right size because this isn't spaced out yet. I pop this open and I just kind of stick it in the general right spot. And then I use my screwdriver that I'm about to use to put it in to just kind of gently tap into the right spot. And it was that easy. So at this point, I'm going to use, these are the screws for the internal body screws. You can see that they are countersunk. I'm just going to place this in, and I'm going to tighten it loosely to the point where it's just kind of stopping and not actually tight at all. And the reason for that is because I still need to fit this one in. And so now, because I just did that, it's just a little bit of a compression fit. But if I had made this actually tight, I wouldn't be able to fit this in at all. And so because it's compression fit, I can pretty easily move this. It doesn't move very quickly, and I almost have it lined up perfectly right there. But I'm again going to just very gently tap it into spot. And it was that easy. Put the other one in. I'm still going to leave those relatively loose. They're like just at the hint of snugness, because next we're going to put this in. Now, I'm not going to put any Loctite on this like I normally would, because I don't know if the knife modders are going to want me to send them the whole knife or just the blade. So I might end up taking this apart again in a moment. But normally I would put blue Loctite in the hole here, and since I use the stick kind that looks like a glue stick, I would use a toothpick to kind of smear it around inside. If you're using the like liquid kind, just put a drop inside the hole. It's better to do it that way inside the hole than on the screw itself, because if you put it on the screw, it has a pretty high tendency of backing up out the screw, kind of getting pushed out the top and overflowing out here and getting around in the general area. And you don't want blue Loctite, or especially not red Loctite. Don't ever use red Loctite on your knives, but you don't want Loctite going into your general pivot area. So gonna just put this in, use the T10. Get that loosely there. Now, at this point, I haven't put scales on this, and you'll see that there's no over travel stop right here, which means I run the risk right now of overextending this, but it's not like a real risk. It's not something that you can do easily. You have to kind of push too hard. So what I wanted to do is see whether or not my centering was on, and I'm just going to place these on top so I can hold it a little bit more the way I would realistically use it, and see if I can get that point where this has no more wobble, but this is still centered, because right now it has just a little bit of wobble. Tighten this down. Okay, there's no wobble there. Are we centered? We're a little bit favoring the show side. Nope, that's the clip side. Let's see if I can get that, back that out just a smidge. Okay, no wobble. Centering is a little bit better. Okay, I'm gonna call that good. And since this is where I want it to be, I'm now going to tighten down these screws all the way. And now we just need to reassemble the scales. So when you're doing this, there are shorter ones and longer ones. That was the same thing we saw earlier on the Newtron. And the longer ones are for going through the clip, and that extra length is to clear this back post of the clip. And so you want to make sure you're using the right screws, because if you put a longer one in here, it runs the risk of making contact with the blade and scratching it. Now on the Nerd, there only are 3. Same thing with the Atom. On both the Nerd and the Atom, there only are 3 body screws. And that could be why they were doing it that way with the screw sets. Because on those, both the Nerd and the Atom, the screw that is the second screw here, that one, is instead just one of the 2 clip screws. And so there's only 3 scale screws. These are a little bit tricky. With the Shadow, they switched to a new way of doing these screws. The clips where the slot is on top and the holes are on the bottom, and that makes it a lot easier, because this part's kind of annoying, because you can get this through easily enough, but now getting these lined up is a little bit tricky sometimes. You'll see the first one's usually pretty easy, and then it gets a little bit annoying after that. Because now I have no choice but to hold the entire knife in my hand and kind of hope that I can fit this through here without it falling off. Well, got it pretty quickly that time. So I'm backing the screw out until I hear it click, and then tightening down. You'll see that there's a little tiny gap right there, which means I'm going to loosen these. That gap is right there, and I'm going to slide this forward. And now that it's fully forward, now I'm going to tighten these back down. So our centering is pretty darn good. There's no play. This is feeling looser. Can I flick this now? Yep, look at that. Hey, yeah, there we are. So even though I find these, when they're correctly tuned, to be pretty flickable, it's just going to be so much easier to do it really 100% of the time. You can see I just failed if I have a proper hole all the way through. And you know, if I come back and get that hole all the way through and really, 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 really love it, I'm going to petition Mary Ann to just full on do that for the next round of the Nerds. I don't know if I'll be able to convince her, but maybe if I make a compelling enough video. Okay, well, thanks for watching, and yeah, I can't wait for that hole. Thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll catch you next time. Bye.